The journey to wealth is a long walk, and some people may walk quicker than others. But what good is sprinting to the finish line if you pass out when you cross it? This is Walk to Wealth with your host, John Mendez. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Walk to Wealth podcast. If you're tuning in on YouTube or any of the podcast directories, make sure to do yourself one teeny tiny little favor and make sure to give us a follow, because I don't want you to miss out on any of the amazing guests I got coming on this year, especially as this year comes to a close. Without further ado, let's get right into this one. Phil, for anyone who hasn't had the opportunity, the pleasure to get to know you, to get to meet you yet, please just do us a quick favor. Give us your quick elevator pitch. Let us know who you are and what you do.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, John. I appreciate it. I mean, I can start with a brief story of mine to introduce who I am and what I'm working on. So back in 2021, I sold my first business. After a pivot, we scaled to $70 million in revenue. And I made a partial exit, partly cash, and then the rest once we sold the inventory. I became a serial entrepreneur, a venture capitalist. I mostly built and invested myself in a tech company called Prometheum. We were aiming at the air purification market, but then it was too soon after COVID. The market wasn't ready. We couldn't find product market fit. Pivoted again, found product market fit, came back from a business trip with $100 million in letter of intent on one hand. And the other one, I had a laptop full of leads that wanted to be our design partners and wanted to have samples. But, you know, at that point, I thought I had made it. I thought I had reproduced my initial success, that I was no longer a fraud of luck and remastered the process and could do it again. And that, you know, that imposter syndrome we all carry would be solved, and I could teach and have impact and, you know, be a positive influence. But that's not what happened. What happened is my technical partners burnt out and quit. And so the business failed. I spent the whole summer trying to restructure that. Thought I was out of the woods, but then I got a phone call from my previous partner at the business I had partially sold saying, "Hey, Phil, I got a bad news. Not only have we not sold the inventory that we were supposed to, but while they were in the transition warehouse, the warehouse burned, and I forgot to insure." And so that was a big hit, and it was my time to break. And at that point, my new adventure began. I stopped being obsessed by business skills and processes and, you know, understanding the growth stage of business and how to growth hack and do all of that stuff that I perceived was what made you successful as a founder. And I started to look more inwards at what happens inside us as founder and the inner journey of entrepreneurship, and starting to realize that this is the root cause of failure and why we are stuck with a failure epidemic of 98% almost of first-time founder failing to build a sustainable business, and the majority of founders being, frankly, either depressed, stressed, or anxious. And so I founded the Founders Compass company with the sole mission of building founders the world doesn't break. And this is the result of a 1.5 year long journey of looking at my successes, my failures, mapping out that inner journey, and now being ready to share what I've learned.
Amazing. So long elevator pitch, but no worries. We're going to dive into all the good stuff, right?
Cut me off. It's fine.
We went from floor 1 to floor like 27. That was just, we went on a skyscraper elevator.
Yeah.
No worries. Let's kind of dive into the conversation. Where I want to start off today is by first asking you about what is your definition of wealth. And I'm curious to hear, you mentioned just in this short story, right? I had one company scaled to 70 million in revenue. You had $100 million letter of intent. And so it's like you've been very successful in your own journey so far, at least monetarily and financially. And I'm sure you've probably have partnered with, collaborated with, or even bumped elbows and networked with other very successful people. So I'm curious to hear, like, what is your definition of wealth?
So my definition of wealth has to do with independence. Wealth versus richness. You know, there's more layers to wealth. There's a power, a strength layer in wealth where you can sustain the wind of markets. You can sustain the unluckiness and still have your course of action and can continue to your purpose. So I think wealth, you know, you can have multiple interpretation. You can have a wealth of love, and I certainly think about my life in terms of multiple buckets. being founder of the year every year was always my core identity that I was chasing for my sons before I discovered anchoring. And so health, and of course, purpose. And so wealth is the strength to carry all of that.
Okay, that's amazing. So your definition of wealth encompasses quite a few things. So the first thing you mentioned is being able to weather storms, right? Whatever life throws at you, you are in a position of life to be able to endure, and not only endure but thrive throughout that, right? Nothing's going to be affected, no matter what life throws at you, whether financially, whether personally, mentally, emotionally. The next thing you mentioned, right, is your sons, right? So family, I hear in there is something that's very important to you. You mentioned independence, right? Not being a slave to your business or a slave to your job or a slave to whatever it is. A lot of people, like you mentioned, tie their identity to what their work is, because most of us work for the majority of the week, especially when you're a founder and stuff like that. And even when you're off the clock, your mind is still on, It's like, so it feels like you can never get away. So you mentioned quite a few important things. And now I want to kind of take you back in a time machine a little bit. What was Littlefield like? Where did these values kind of stem from? What was life like growing up?
Well, I had a happy childhood, especially before I was a teenager. We were never rich, but I have a brother and a sister. They are both 4 and 8 years younger than me. So I was the oldest in my family. My father didn't have an easy life. He dropped out of school in high school, first or second year. He had learning disabilities and had a tough family situation. And so when I became a teenager, he eventually lost his job. And because he had limited skills that would be marketable, he spent a few years without a job and became depressed and got in that storm. And little Phil always wanted to protect people. He was always very, very curious and very much value and virtue driven and very intense. And I stepped up to, carry the financial burden of my family at 14 years old. I was paying electricity, food, and stuff like that while in school, working nights and weekends. And that parentified me, and it made me stronger, but it also made me very much future focused and anxious in many ways, which I had to integrate at some point. But that gave me a lot of fire to fuel the fire of growth, I would say. So I was very obsessed by growth in understanding, wisdom, growth in capacity. And eventually, when I came to terms with money, I also wanted to be ambitious money-wise. But for many years, because I could see that most of the pain my family was in was due to being in debt, and pursuing money as a relief, I was very against anything material for many, many years. I studied to be a high school teacher in social science just because I was intense and I knew I wanted to have kids young. And I thought, well, if I do a doctorate in psychology or philosophy, I'll end up teaching most likely. So I'll just go to the social science path and do a 4-year degree here to be a high school teacher in that space. And in that process, I went out of my comfort zone and became a sales guy. Selling cell phone, became very good, top in Canada for many years. And that gave me money to get into real estate, and a whole process of transformation occurred, leading me out of teaching and into business, but always wanted to go back. And for me, it became going back to entrepreneurship, which I thought needed another exit. But now I feel like I'm ready because I have something more important to share.
So you mentioned quite a lot there very quickly, and I want to, for anyone listening, just kind of do a quick recap. So you mentioned early on that, you saw your father firsthand deal with depression, and you had to step up in order to fill in the gap that the family needed. So you sacrificed a bit of your childhood and your innocence to get into the working world early, and had to grow up a lot faster than you probably need, because of necessity, right? You had to grow up, you were forced to. Then from there, you mentioned that kind of had a bit of a play with your relationship with money. And you mentioned that you were kind of averse to anything materialistic, which I want to dive into a little bit. And then from there, you pursued psychology and you wanted to get some into social services, and then eventually ended up getting into real estate. So you mentioned quite a few things there, and you mentioned how due to that, you growing up earlier, that ended up, that ambition, that drive to take care, protect, right, ended up transferring into your the fire for you and success in your career. But before we get into that, there's a couple of different things you mentioned there. So I want to hit each of them one at a time. So to start off with, you said 14, take us back to that time period. You're 14, you just witnessed your dad lose his job. He wasn't able to find a job easily due to his, the lack of marketable skills that you mentioned. And Littlefield now has to step up and be a provider now at 14. What was kind of going through your head at that point in time, if you could remember? You could have also just chosen to not be a provider and shrunk, right? You always have options in life, but you chose to step up. Just take us to that time period. You don't have to go super deep, but just bring us to there and talk a little bit about what was going through your head at that point in time.
Well, so I was always very intense as a person. I was intense in pursuing truth and that made me into a very value-driven person.
Yeah, it's a truth. So
truth.
That's not. That's not something that early on that people are very interested in pursuing. No. So you always had a good head on your shoulders. You were always okay.
Yeah. I was very curious about all of that, and my mother made me a very empathic person. I think I have a higher level of like I have empathy and sympathy for people, and I care for them, and so all of that mix of value and interest and I guess existential need to understand and have some truth led to me being very sorry, I need to drink some water for a second.
No worries. Yeah, no, I definitely feel you. That I was very similar, and that's why I was curious. I wanted to hear, what was that like for you?
All right. So no, sorry. So it led me to be very much okay. If that's the truth, or if that's what needs to be done, I'll do it. And so self-sacrificing and very serving purposes or values that were to me important. And so when my dad got depressed, and I understood he was depressed years later because I worked in pharmaceutical sales in the depression space, and so I got educated more on depression at that point. But when I was a young teenager, it was more like, okay, let's all do what we have to do to make sure that everybody's okay. And I could, with my empathy over my dad, I wanted him to be better. My brother and my sister, I wanted them to have a normal childhood. I remember one time it was Christmas, and my mother bought a pan. I should have. I just ate before the podcast.
No worries.
And now I ramble a lot, so I talk to. But so my mother bought a pan for my brother and a pair of socks for me, and I think, I don't know, I like a little doll for my sister. It was and she was so heartbroken because of that. And we had meals, from charity coming over for a Christmas dinner. And so I went and I bought them a video game, and so I just wanted them to feel better. And I thought my father was doing everything in his power to take care of his family. But then at some point I realized he was turning down some jobs because it was too hard for him to have that identity of maybe that being the dishwasher, because he craved that sense of approval. And as a kid, I thought it was a betrayal. And I became, a bit angry for a couple of years because I was doing everything I could because I thought that was my role. And when I saw my father wasn't, in my eyes, then it felt like a betrayal. But then I realized he was depressed, years later, and he was just human, and there's multiple layers to that. But in the midst of it, it just felt like we just have to do that. And I was a football player, I was a linebacker, I was very disciplined. I was kind of tough, even though I was sensitive. And so I don't know.
That's very deep. No, I appreciate you sharing. Yeah. It's one of those things where, we never know. I think a lot of, as a kid, it's very hard to understand what goes on in life as an adult until you're an adult yourself, right? we see a lot of things we can't really make sense for it until we're a lot older, and then we're like, oh crap, that's why. And which also leads to forgiveness later on in life and stuff. So fast forward a little bit. So again, you mentioned the next big thing. You mentioned that you had a relationship with money and finances that wasn't the best, right? Because you saw how much your family struggled with finances and debt, and the lack of relief they had because of the debt and everything. So take us through what it was like kind of reversing that mindset, because it could be very easy to grow up and just be like, oh, money is bad. Look at like what it did to my family. It tore my family apart. You know, we struggled so hard growing up. I had to get a job at 14 just to provide for my family, all due to money. And it could have been very easy and very much well justified if you just gone the rest of your life saying, I hate money. Money is bad, you know, and I never want to be in pursuit of money because I see what it did for my family. And I want to make sure my family, your family now, doesn't have to deal with the same thing that you dealt with as a kid. So what was it like kind of reversing that mindset? Because as an entrepreneur, having a mindset like that pretty much guarantees you're going to fail, right? Mm-hmm. If you have a bad relationship with money, there's almost no way to succeed as an entrepreneur. So what was it like kind of undoing that relationship and fixing it to what it is today?
Yes. For me, it happened when I was in my early 20s. And so I was almost done with my universities. So you know, from 14 to 20 years old, I was a dishwasher in the cafeteria, and I was then promoted to do sandwiches. And sometimes I had a couple of jobs at the same time. I was coaching football, but I never made real good money. I mean, when the law for salary equity came passed in Canada, I had a bump in salary, you know, so a huge bump. I was really underpaid. But when I finished my cégep level, which is kind of a level that we have here in between high school and university, it's 2 years in between, I took half a year off. I worked in a call center, customer service, and that gave me some confidence to then try to get a sales job, even though I was super shy. And I was super good at it because I could internalize every process I was doing so that I could optimize the wording. And it was in a time where there was a lot of demand. So the success was more in efficiency than anything else. Can you go through the cycle as fast as you can? And I could. And so for the first time I started to have real money. I was making around 40 grand Canadian. So that's like 10,000 US.
A year or a month?
A year.
Okay. So that's a good starting off salary. Fresh out.
Yeah.
Especially at that age, your early 20s.
Yeah.
Right.
15 years ago, I've been, before I had the job at $12 an hour, and now I was making, you know, way more than that. And so that gave me disposable income. And my father always dreamed of having real estate. And so I started to look into, okay, maybe I should invest in real estate. The transition for me was, I was very hangry at money because my parents were seeking relief through giving stuff. And so when my father lost his job, he had just renovated, you know, bought a new car and all of that stuff, bought a house that he couldn't afford. And you know, so the debt was a big issue. And when they were feeling bad, they would wanted to give us little stuff. And it was always, and I was like, hey, I just paid the electricity.
What if one tool was all you need to start your business and make your first 6 or 7 figures? See, I was never entrepreneurial growing up. And after starting my first business, I spent the first 2.5 years completely lost. Nothing worked for me until I found Kajabi. See, if you offer coaching, courses, if you have a private community, if you want to start a podcast, a newsletter, a blog, if you have a membership community, Kajabi has you covered. They have everything you need to start, scale, and sustain your business all in one. So I want to offer you a free strategy session where we'll talk about your business, your goals, and how Kajabi can help you. All you have to do is use the link in the description, and as an extra bonus, I'll get you a free 30-day trial to test out Kajabi. Normally, they only offer 2 weeks, so hurry up, click the link in the description. With that being said, let's get right back into this episode.
Bill, why don't you just stop giving us candy and start, you know,
paying the bills,
bills. And so that relationship, that anger towards indebtment and seeking relief through money was very strong in me. But then the shift happened, and the shift happened when I decided on a noble goal. At the time, I had stopped playing football. I started to do karate, and I could see that nature was very important to me. I was hiking a lot, and I could see that karate, from a traditional sense, brought up a different level of harmony in my life. And I wanted to have a non-profit karate camp in a big enough land so that we could protect the sacred aspect of nature, and so that required some money. I couldn't do it without money. And I thought, okay, I like real estate. I like the process of looking for houses, and that shopping felt very interesting to me. And I figured if I have 20 apartments before the age of 30, then when I'm 50, they're going to be fully paid. And then I'm going to have some cash flow, and I can have my karate camp without charging anybody, or not be reliant on money and denature the mission of the camp. And so for some reason, that gave me the right to make money. And I bought 2 rental properties, one fourplex and one threeplex, by the time I graduated university. And then
you're at what, 23 or 24 at the time?
Yeah, I was 23, I guess, when I graduated. Yeah.
So 23, and you just bought 2 multifamilies.
Yeah, a very cheap one that I had to renovate, and I didn't know anything. I was changing the lights, and I was turning on the breaker because I thought it needed to be on all the time, and it just kept breaking in my face, and I had no clue what I was doing.
But you figured it out, man, and that's an important lesson I want to kind of take away and share with the listeners, right? There's a saying that money is the root of all evil, right? We all know it. We all have heard it somewhere. There's also another saying I love, which is money is good for the good that money can do. And if money is the primary bartering tool, that's all really that money is. It's just a bartering tool, right? But it is the primary bartering tool that we use across the globe. And so if money is the primary one, it'd be wise to have some of it, because if not, it's going to be a lot harder to do the things that you want to do, like your karate camp that you don't want to charge people for. And so a lot of people think that, money is evil and all this thing and whatever. And it's like, well, not having money is actually pretty selfish, right? Because if you think about it, if you're only making enough money for you, and let's say maybe you have a family, let's say you and your family, well, what if your extended family needs help, right? Or let's say your grandmother or your auntie, your cousin, let's say they got in a car accident and they need help on some medical bills, right? Well, you're not going to be able to help them. You only have enough money for you and your family, right? Let's say you see someone and they're going through a hard time, right? A friend, right? They just got lost a job, right? Maybe they lost a job and it's like, yo, hey, I really need some help. Well, you can't help them. You only have enough money for you and your family, right? Mm-hmm. Let's say you see a bunch of at-risk youth, right? At-risk kids that are maybe going through them. So for me, one of the things that I want to start a not-for-profit too, like in the future, like one time, like I've made it in the business world and I have more money than I know what to do with. One of the things I want to do is there's like a couple areas that I've been looking into, but like I know and that I want to get into mainly because I want to do something where I struggled with growing up. So I always had free lunch growing up, right? We didn't have enough money, so we were always on a free lunch program. And so that school lunch wasn't always that good. And so there's a lot of times where you just go without food, and especially in high school, man. Oh my goodness! Like during football season, you gotta think about it. You're waking up at 6 o'clock to catch a 6:30 bus to go to school by 7:15, right? Then you're in school. You only have lunch, and then you get out at like 2. But if you play sports afterwards, right, then you have to stay after for a couple hours. Right. The bus comes, at least for me in my high school, came at 6. So I would get home around like almost 7 o'clock. So that's like 6 to 7. That's like 13-hour days. Yeah. And I'm only eating one lunch and maybe some snacks throughout the day. Right. Very malnourished. But anyway, we figured it out. So I definitely want to do something for food. Another thing is mental health. You mentioned depression and anxiety. And that's something that people close to me, nothing that I've dealt with personally, but like people very, very close to me have dealt with. at a very high. So maybe something for like mental health. But like to your point, right? Because I don't want to go on too much of a tangent. Um, when you have money, you can put into the world, you can make your visions a reality without having to worry, right? Another one I was going to
Yeah.
mention, the church, right? I want to start my own church. I
Yeah.
want to do like, my faith has been one of the biggest drivers in my life, and really my foundation for who I am today. And I would love to I'd love to do more cool things at my church, but there's too many people they have to go through and like to make. So for example, like I told them like, hey, like why don't we start like a podcasting thing? Not to like record the actual sermons, but just to like have like kids to teach them about podcasting, right? Because I have a podcast, and all kids want to be influencers and freaking content creators and all that stuff. And so like, I mean, I already have my own equipment. I could teach them how to do their own little interviews or whatever, and like, but like different like youth programs. But again, stuff like that costs money, and if you don't have it, well, it's not going to come from thin air. So I agree with you 1,000,000% about that mindset of like that switch of like, hey, I can't do the good in the world that I want to do if I don't have money is an amazing driver, because it's gonna put some that pep in your step to like, all right, I got to get after it and figure out how we can make this happen.
Well, and to your point, so what's the difference? Because I think a lot of people, money's not necessary to accumulate for everyone, I think, but I think it has to do a lot with your level of ambition and your level of either your level of ambition or ownership of a problem that you really want to get solved. Like you had the problem of being malnourished, you had the problem, a lot of money related problem that you wanted to solve for yourself as a young person, but for others now that could be in that same spot. And I think the next question people ask themselves is, what's my risk tolerance? Because if you want to create abnormal wealth, you need to take abnormal risk in many ways. And risk is a very, very complex subject that people misunderstand a lot, because it plays on different planes and different altitudes of analysis. There's the analysis of self-worth. What would I risk if I go out there and get out of my comfort zone to try to create something that has a low likelihood of succeeding, like an entrepreneurial venture, because you mostly don't know what you're doing, right? And the world can flip away your dreams at any point. Then the other layer is about financial risk, because if you cut time out of your main job, or if you don't take a part job and you decide to create something that can create asymmetric wealth, like a venture again or a side hustle, well, it could fail and you could be investing money into that. So now you're worse. And then there's the risk of purpose. And some people don't have a crying need for self-expression and the self-actualization the same way an entrepreneur might more be inclined to have, And so these little risks combined with ambition and ownership create a mix that give birth to entrepreneurs often, but also gives you a relationship to wealth that's different than someone that could be super happy doing a 9 to 5, working at McDonald's, or they don't have to create that much wealth. And at the end of the day, you can make the argument that if your friend is in trouble, he is the owner of his life. He should, you don't have to save him, but you have the ambition and the ownership to have that impact. So that's a driver that's different.
Yeah. I want to touch on the first thing you said. You mentioned about the self-worth. I think a lot of people don't understand how much entrepreneurship just reveals about yourself. Money aside, like this is probably like the greatest personal development journey you could ever sign up for.
It's a hero journey. Yeah.
It's freaking starting a business. Like this, man, I was talking about a couple of my friends about how much being an entrepreneur actually sucks. Like it's especially like an online entrepreneur. It is awful, especially in the growth stages, because like, man, you're looking at the same screen. You have Zoom, we have Riverside that we're on right now. I have Kajabi that I use. I have my Gmail account. Like I'm switching between the same 5-6 tabs all day, pretty much every day. And it gets very boring to look at, and the money's not there, and then you don't see the fruits of your labor immediately after all the time. There's so much that sucks about being an entrepreneur that I've just kind of like come to terms with.
I'd just rather still be an entrepreneur than get back to a job. But you mentioned about self-worth, which is what the original point I want to hit on. I think another thing too is a lot of people look at things as to how much they cost. And like one of the mindsets I think that kind of helped me get into entrepreneurship is like when I see something, I just kind of ask myself, am I worth it? Like, for example, let's say there's like a $97 course. I'm like, $97, that's like for a little course. But then I ask myself sometimes, like, am I worth it? And like, it's like a no-brainer, no duh. Like, obviously I'm worth $97. Like, I'm investing in me, you know?
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things that kind of like the mindset shift that helped me in my entrepreneurship journey. Because again, you got to, like, when you get into entrepreneurship, most of the stuff is play to play, right? You can get by on YouTube videos, you can get but so far, but like most of the real stuff, you just pay to play, whether it's getting in the right room, getting access to the right systems and or technology or the right programs, right? A lot of it is pay to play, and the good ones usually, not all the times, usually, generally speaking, cost a lot more, and for good reason. And so like you come to terms with like a lot of like what you mentioned before we even got into the main conversation in that little elevator pitch, you mentioned imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
And that shows up in so many ways. And then I want to hear your thoughts on this, and we'll pivot a little bit. Because I've always been very confident. I've always been very sure of myself. I've always been someone who knows what they want and am comfortable in my own skin. And so I thought I was immune to imposter syndrome. I thought I could never be affected.
Yeah.
Like, what? You know, I'm a confident young man. I know I got talents. I know I'm hardworking. I thought I could never, until it came time for me to start charging for my classes.
Yeah.
And then the imposter syndrome freaking hit me like an 18-wheeler. I was like, oh, doing them for free, I can do them all day. I'm good at what I do. I know what I'm doing. Then it came time to start charging. And like, man, it was so weird. And I had to work my way up. And a lot of entrepreneurs say like, oh, you know, do the Tesla strategy, right? Tesla started with their most expensive model, and that's how they got some cash flow. And then from there, you know, they kind of went down, and then they went mass market, right? Which is a great strategy, and it worked for Tesla. And the average first-time founder, first-time entrepreneur, first-time business owner who doesn't really know what they're doing, they just kind of got an idea and ran with it and are figuring it out as they are building the thing that they're figuring out, you know, like that person, that archetype, like you mentioned earlier, is so different. Like for me, like even charging $100 for something was tough. And then I remember I did 197, right? And then I was like, all right. And then I think the first thing I charged for was like $27 or like somewhere between 27 and 50. I forget the math. I think I had like 20 something people sign up. I made it like 1,000 flat. So whatever the math comes out to, I think it was somewhere between like 25 and like $40 or something like that for that class.
Yeah.
Right, and then I charged 97, and then I went to 197, right, and then I went to I did a 499 launch, and then I did a 999 and a 1497, and the highest as of right now that I charge for one single package is, as of right now, 3,000 is the highest I've charged. But like it took so long in between each, like just for me to go from not charging to charging 197 was a full year process. And when you really think about it, $200 is not a lot of money. People spend $200 on back to school shopping every year, right? And so it's like people spend $200 on a pair of shoes, right? That's just literally just vanity, right? Materialistic. There's no actual real value, but besides a little dopamine hit and being able to, you know, people spend that much money on shoes just to have them in boxes and never actually wear them. And I include myself, right? When I was younger, but like I couldn't yet muster up that to charge somebody else. And so again, it shows up in so many ways. So me aside, right, enough of me, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on like imposter syndrome. How have you seen imposter syndrome show up in your life and in the lives of the business owners and entrepreneurs that you know you've talked to and met along the way?
Well, I appreciate you sharing that. And I felt the same, and I still feel bad charging for my time. That's why I want to stay away from coaching, and I want to build more of a mastermind and have a format, a productized service is how I hide behind that a little bit, because if you productize your service, you can sell the outcome that your program delivers, and then it's easier to justify the money and factor in the constraint that you have. But I was not able to charge. I mean, 2024, I spent the whole year just aimlessly listening to my whispers of intuition and going around doing M&A advising and doing go-to-market for SaaS and AI-driven micro SaaS. Teaching AI at some point after I've done all the training, and eventually stopped to do the private equity fund. But I could have charged a ton of cash to a lot of people. I just didn't feel it. Now I fixed it, so it's fixable. That's cool.
Yeah.
But a service is not easy. It's mainly inbound. It's a lot of brand driven. You have to build bridges of trust. So people think, yeah, you can make money faster if you do a service that's. But at the end, on the other side of that spectrum it's a business. It's not straightforward. But to go back to your point, in entrepreneurship in general, I conceptualize imposter syndrome through unworthiness, is what I call it. And I frame it through what I call the shadow of entrepreneurship. So if you think about emotional intelligence, there's thousands of emotions, right, to build emotional awareness. But as founders, I think we need to pay attention to three. The first one is uncertainty. The second one is fear, and then unworthiness. And it usually spirals from one to the other if you don't pay attention to see them and learn to navigate them. So let me give you an example. So when you start a business, you have your idea, you have your plan. If you're action driven, you might not have written much, but you kind of know where you're going, kind of thing, right? And if you're very analytical, you have a 75 business plan, 75-page business plan. But regardless, you start from a place of hope and clarity. You go there with your idea that you want to validate with the market, and when you rub it against the market, what happens?
You get some feedback. Some
feedback that's usually not what you expected. So you enter the realm of uncertainty, and then do you know how to navigate that feeling? Because there's multiple layers to dealing with uncertainty. If you don't navigate it well and you don't get out of it for too long, sometimes you step into fear of failure. You start to be more reactive. You start to optimize for survival more than for vision. And you lose your superpower as a founder, which is to see the future, at least to conceptualize it and plan around that. And at some point, you start to question if you even have what it takes to do it. And so that the unworthiness layer steps in. And that's a failure zone moment when you step into the fear and unworthiness area, because if you don't learn to shortcut that spiral, you're going to have identity fusion with your business. So the unworthiness is going to be tied to your business outcome. It's going to be tied to your identity as the CEO of that business. You're going to start thinking, hey, I've gone too far to go back and say, you know what, I failed. To all the people that doubted you for so many years, because nobody gets an entrepreneur. And the one that gets you sometimes are competing against you. So it's, you're isolated a lot as a founder. And that fusion of pressure, fear, unworthiness makes it so that most people, when they fail, it's very destructive. They don't see failure as a crossroad to transform and actually pick up, I call that the broken idle pieces that you learn along the way in your journey as an entrepreneur, of things you thought were true but ended up not being true, that you can now patch into a better inner accounts, is how I conceptualize them, that will help you build another successful venture afterwards. So it's a very, very destructive storm that there's no exoneration from as founders. You're always going to hit a moment. And if you haven't dealt with unworthiness and imposter syndrome, it's just that you haven't been visited by that storm because you might not have stepped out of your comfort zone, really. Maybe you're just side hustling. Maybe you're just in a business season where you're optimizing something that works. You don't have to deal with uncertainty as much. You're not in the product market fit stage or the early scale phase or the pivot phase, the plateau phase. These are seasons of entrepreneurship within the entrepreneurial journey that have a more entrepreneurial energy to it. Whereas when you have your team and you're optimizing, yes, you're still going to be visited by the shadow, but you could be at a plateau phase. So it's less prevalent, but sooner or later, you're going to get there. The more you get outside your comfort zone, the more you're lucky or unlucky, it's going to happen. And so, yeah, that's what
you mentioned a lot there, and I resonate with a lot of it. I think for anyone listening, I hope you didn't miss the part where you mentioned that if you're not feeling any of these feelings, it's probably because you're not stepping out of your comfort zone. I quit my job, for those who've listened to the podcast before, back in 2023, in June to be exact, right? 2024 was the most difficult year of my entire life. Also the year I made almost double what I made in 2023.
Wow.
In 2024, which isn't crazy much. I think we did like just under 50,000.
But it's a success. I mean, you check the box.
Yeah, I'm at the point where I'm like, this is like an average starting salary. So like, I'm doing it now,
Yeah,
and
more than when you were employed. That's already a big win.
Exactly. And so, but like mentally, I remember because I was with my business mentor, and it was so interesting. Like as I reflected, 2023 when I was with him, we just talked about strategies and tactics and different funnels and launching and all these fun, crazy, entrepreneur stuff. 2024 was pretty much just therapy. I was just sad all the time. It went from high level marketing tactics and strategy to just therapy. I was just freaking, bro, I was going through it mentally. Oh my goodness. I had a bad launch. Or not a bad launch. It was an okay launch in comparison to the launch I had prior that allowed me to quit my job, right? So I didn't share the story with you, Phil. So pretty much I had a 33K launch in a week in June that allowed me of 2023 to quit my job. Then in January of 2024, I was like, all right, I'm going to try to make 100K. I'm going to do a 100K launch. And I got almost double the opt-ins that I had last time. So I was like playing the numbers in my head. It's like, all right, I got double the opt-ins. I get the same conversion rate and we're going to make so much more money. I upped the price to my offer a little bit. So it's like, if I get the same amount of people, I was just playing spreadsheet millionaire. Like what my mentor used to say, first day one of my pitch. So I did a multi-stage challenge. And so day one open cart, I pitched and no one bought. I would never been so depressed in my entire life. I hated myself. I remember I was freaking called my girlfriend and just freaking like, I was like, yo, I don't even want to talk. Could I just like crawl in your like and just lay on you? Like I didn't want to talk to nobody, didn't want to be an entrepreneur, didn't want to do nothing with myself, man. I was for like 2 days just so out of it. And that kind of like you mentioned, that uncertainty, right, just crept into my business, crept into my identity. And like I started to lose myself without realizing, slowly but surely, like that young, super optimistic, super naive entrepreneur that most people are when they first get into the business, right? That all kind of went out the window. I'm like, yo, this sucks. And so all of 2024, and then I did another launch in September. That launch did a 9.8, I think, 9.8, which is not awful. But like when the first launch did 33, and then the second launch did half of that, and the third launch did half of the second one, I was like, damn, I suck at this. And then and mind you, 2024 we did double what we did in 2023. So like it was a better year technically on the books. But yeah, life just hit me with so many curveballs. And so again, I had to just talk. Unfortunately, I had someone that already been through these stages help me navigate. But like the importance of mentorship, the importance of having people around you to talk to and keep you grounded, even when you don't think it's working out. And then life started happening, started helping around the house more, started getting into debt, credit score dropped, life started lifing, and like 2025, this March is when I snapped out of it. I listened to a sermon and that kind of just hit me right in the heart. I was like, all right, this is what I needed to hear, and kind of flip the script. And so now I've been working on getting out of debt and like turning it back around. But like, man, like from like January 2024 to like March of 2025, that was probably like mentally, I wasn't in the best spot. And it was tough. And again, I quit my job, so like there's nothing else. It's just the business, you know. And so so that's been tough, but I kind of flipped the script in that. Now I'm coming out of that, and so this quarter one was good to me. Quarter two was good to me. Quarter three was a little slow, but like quarter four, I'm excited. This upcoming month is going to be very interesting. And so, you know, but to your point, there are a lot of different stages and a lot of different emotions that you kind of navigate and just kind of rotate through as an entrepreneur. And sometimes, you know, it's you listen to a motivational speech and you're right back in it. Sometimes it takes you a year and a half, right? Sometimes it takes you a decade. But like that's all stuff that, you know, you have to kind of work through as an entrepreneur. And like you mentioned, if you're not aware of what goes on in these stages and you don't disassociate the emotions you're feeling from your identity as a person and the success of the business, it could be very difficult to get out of it and snap out of it on your own.
Well, you said a couple of things that I want to go back to. So you said, you know, I've quit my job. Now I have my business, and you know, like it's the last frontier, right? Well, that's a very dangerous narrative that you tell yourself, because that can lead to identity fusion with your business. And so when the business starts going bad, you're going to feel it very, very strongly as a founder. And also you mentioned when you got back to a sermon, then it gave you a renewed sense of purpose and energy. And I think you should keep in mind the principle behind that, which is that as founders, we need to define success outside the business. For me, when I got scammed for $5.4 million, it hurt. But I was aiming at a definition of success that involved me becoming a world-class entrepreneur. So already that was protecting me, because regardless of what happens in my business, the experience I'm gaining brings me closer to someone I want to become. And then I also ask myself, so, you know, we think about what's your why? Well, what's the why of going into being an entrepreneur? So you have your personal why that gets to change. For me, it was a karate camp. Then it became teaching entrepreneurship. Then it became many different things. The who adapted as I learned to transform rather than grow. The why of being an entrepreneur now feels like my fate, and I have to accept the good and the bad that comes with being an entrepreneur, because I don't see myself being anything else. Now I have the perspective of being in the arena for many years. And then you arrive to your business at that point. So when you have that identity foundation, it really empowers you and protects you from identity fusion. But then in terms of navigating these emotions, one thing I had to learn the hard way was to let the world burn. And it doesn't have to take a year. It can take a day, like you going on your girlfriend's lap for an hour, an evening, and getting back to it. But the core is to not make reactive decision, because the first domino of startup failure is when you lose decision quality. When you don't, and that doesn't mean there's a right and a wrong decision. It means there's a quality and an unquality decision. Yeah. A reactive decision is not a quality decision. A decision that doesn't factor risk is not a quality decision. A decision that doesn't think about scaling bottlenecks and things, a future perspective. There's elements to that. And if you protect that and you follow your intuition, at some point you're going to be at the right place and you're going to see the path. So that's more of that's an inner journey talk, and it's hard to grasp, but if you do grasp it, it's going to help any ventures you have. Because, for example, you mentioned your launch, you seem to evaluate success a lot in financial outcome. But if the product and the fit you're launching serves an audience that's dear to you, makes you someone that's you want to become, then it's not just the actual result of that experiment. That experiment serves as a pathway for your growth and transformation at the same time. And the money is going to flow because you're going to stop changing too much. You're going to aim for product market fit, yes, but message market fit. Once you have that and you have the product market fit, then it's not necessarily about launching different things. It's about scaling what works to get to the next phase too. So I don't know if that's helpful. Not apply
1,000%. Yeah. It's something that I had to work through, and that's kind of like, again, having that mentor to help me kind of like reflect with and bounce ideas with help me kind of get out of that. But again, it's one of those things where it's like, Man, it can be tough, man, especially when life starts hitting you outside of business as well. So now you're getting punched from both ends.
Yeah.
Right now the candlestick is burning on both ends, right? And so,
yeah.
that's when it really gets tough, and especially at the age that I'm at, so it's like, it could be tough. But again, thank God I've worked through it, and again, I'm just becoming a better and better entrepreneur. I have to remind myself, and so, and even still, like I just had thoughts of this like a couple of weeks ago from the time we're recording this. It was like, people, for anyone listening, it never goes away. You just get better at managing it and handling it, because as you continue in this journey of entrepreneurship, stuff is going to get thrown at you that you didn't expect. That's tougher. You just one of my favorite quotes, and then we'll pivot. I think Jim Rohn, he says, "Don't wish for less problems, wish for more skills." Right.
Yeah.
And so, speaking of that, we talked a lot about identity, and one of the things I always say is awareness is power. And I know that you've been working on, a form to kind of help, founders identify what kind of founder they are, so they can start playing to their strengths and be more aware of their weaknesses.
Yes.
Tell us, Phil, where can we find you at? Where can we connect with you? Where can we get access to all the amazing stuff that you're bringing into this world?
Thank you. Well, my company's name is Founders Compass. So founders with an S, compass.com. And I've just launching the founder readiness assessment. And what it does is it looks at your founder archetype. It takes about 15 minutes to do. It gives you your archetype out of 4 potential archetype, and it gives you a sense of your level of mastery for the 4 dimension of the founder readiness inner world, right? So it's emotional mastery, decision mastery, intuition mastery, and performance. It has nothing to do with skills, operation, business growth stage. It has really everything to do with the inner edge operating system of founder readiness, because your ceiling as a founder is the ceiling of your business, and that awareness of the inner journey is really what makes the difference between succeeding and not. And I can explain a bit more about the archetypes, but if you're curious to see, hey, I'd like to not have a fixed description, fixed mindset picture of who I am, but more of a snapshot of where I am and where I could potentially improve, so that business is less painful. And this is very, very useful. And if you want to get more into action, I'm launching a mastermind next year. We're targeting more early growth stage founder that hit the complexity wall, so that we learn to navigate the complex decisions we have to make as founder and transform from founder-led sale to leader. It's going to be a full year, and the first cohort is going to be super cheap. So you can reach out to me on LinkedIn or on my website.
All right, amazing, Phil. So now it's time for our famous 5-question rapid fire round. Same 5 questions I ask every single guest that hops on. Question number 1, and we're going fast. What is the most impactful lesson you've learned in life?
Let the world burn.
What is the most admirable trait a person can have?
The most amicable?
Admirable.
Admirable. Love comes to me. I don't know, it's not a trait, but
if you had one book you had to recommend to change somebody's life forever, which one would you recommend?
Man's Search for Meaning.
What is the legacy that you're working on leaving behind?
I want to leave an operating system for the inner journey of entrepreneurship.
And for anyone that wants to embark on their walk to wealth, what is the first step you recommend they take?
To think about their why and who, and be clear on that, so that they embark on a journey from a proactive mindset and not a reactive one.
Amazing. Phil, thank you so much for your time. I know we went a little bit over today, but I'm really glad we had to have this conversation, because I think it's something, when this releases, should be sometime December-ish of 2025, which is around that time where, great way to reset your mindset and think about, like, how do you want to intentionally enter into the new year, right? So, Phil, thank you so much for just sharing your wisdom, your lessons, your stories, and some of your experience from your life, man. I'm so glad we had an opportunity to connect and talk. And for anyone listening, thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you on the next episode.
Thanks, John.
Thank you for tuning in to the Walk to Wealth podcast. There's an old African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. So make sure to hit that subscribe or follow button so we can continue on our journey to wealth together. And again, I'm your host, John Mendez, and I'll see you on the next episode.